Chapter 1. My girlfriend Elaine stood me up again. We had planned a dinner tonight for both sets of parents to meet and discuss the details of our engagement. For this dinner, I had specially booked the hardest-to-get private kitchen in the city center half a month in advance, and even personally checked every dish for dietary restrictions. However, just half an hour before the meal was supposed to start, Elaine called. "Harrison, I'm sorry. Ethan got into a fight at a bar and got hurt. He's in the hospital now. He has no other family here, so I need to go help him handle things. Please apologize to your parents for me. I'll come and make it up to them another day." On the other end of the line, her voice carried an unmistakable note of urgency, with the faint, distinctive noise of a hospital corridor and Ethan's low groans of pain audible in the background. Ethan. Always Ethan. He was Elaine's childhood friend, having grown up alongside her. Years ago, after Ethan's family fell from grace, Elaine, out of past affection, shielded him under her protection, and Ethan relished this privilege of having Elaine at his beck and call. I had seen through Ethan's motives long ago. On the surface, he played the role of a harmless, helpless friend. In reality, he was like a leech clinging to the mighty tree of Elaine's family, greedily siphoning off their resources. He opened his studio and mingled in high society circles, all thanks to Elaine funneling money behind the scenes. He didn't love Elaine at all, he just knew too well that she fell for his active whining and playing weak. So every time Elaine and I got closer, or whenever Elaine planned to withdraw certain resources, he would run into trouble, at the most coincidental moment, using it to test Elaine's limits, ruthlessly cutting off any chance for her to leave him, ensuring he could keep draining her blood forever. In the past, if I had heard this, I would have either furiously questioned her for abandoning the elders for another man, or sadly compromised out of sympathy for her predicament. I would have argued with her, demanded a promise, and eventually lost again under her perfunctory comfort. But this time, I just calmly looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window and let out a bitter, self-mocking smile. "Oh, okay. Then get on with your work," I said. There was no fluctuation in my tone, as if I were listening to an insignificant notification. Elaine on the other end of the phone was clearly taken aback. In her expectations, I should have been angry, or at least shown some emotion. She had even prepared a set of lines like, "Ethan is just a friend who needs care, don't be unreasonable." But my reaction was too light as a ball of cotton, causing her full-force punch to hit nothing but air. Aren't you mad?" Elaine probed cautiously, her tone carrying a hint of impatience. "There's nothing to be angry about. You go ahead and take care of your stuff," I replied, casually picking up the coffee beside me and taking a sip. The bitterness of the coffee spread across the tip of my tongue. "Well, that's good. I knew you'd understand me. I'll hang up now." Elaine sighed with relief and hurriedly ended the call. Hearing the dial tone from the phone, I put down the cup, turned around, and smiled at my parents waiting in the living room. "Dad, Mom, Elaine has something urgent tonight and can't make it. We'll just eat by ourselves. Let's try the signature dishes here." My mother frowned slightly, a hint of concern flashing in her eyes. "Harrison, this is the third time this month, isn't it? Every time it's because of that Ethan. What about your wedding?" "Mom, let's eat first. Let's not talk about this." I considerately pulled out the chair for my mother, still wearing a gentle smile. No one knew that I had awakened half a day ago. I suddenly realized that I was living inside an online novel, and I was the big fool fiancé whose only purpose was to fuel the relationship between the male and female leads. No matter how much I gave, in Elaine's eyes, it could never outweigh even a single cough from the male lead, Ethan. Since my past efforts were meaningless, starting now, I decided to live for myself. I didn't want to argue, I didn't want to win her back, I just wanted to focus on my career. After the banquet, I took my parents back home. By the time I returned to the apartment I shared with Elaine, it was already 11 o'clock at night. Looking at the furnishings in the room, which were filled with traces of Elaine's life everywhere, I didn't sit on the sofa waiting for her to come home as usual. I walked into the bedroom, pulled out a huge suitcase, and began to pack my clothes and personal belongings one by one. When it's time to cut ties, cut ties. I no longer need cheap self-pity. Chapter 2. Over the next 3 days, Elaine didn't return to the apartment, and I didn't send her a single message. Elaine was used to my unconditional tolerance and devotion. In the past, whenever she neglected me because of Ethan, I would always take the initiative to text her within a few hours, offering warm greetings, or sending a red envelope, or ordering takeout to break the ice. This time, Elaine's phone was unusually silent. Ethan, eating an apple on the hospital bed, noticed Elaine's absent-mindedness and teased with a smile, "Elaine, Harrison sure has a temper this time, hasn't checked in for 3 days. Aren't you going to go coax him?" With her strong sense of pride, Elaine snorted coldly and tossed her phone into her bag. "If he won't talk, fine. It's all just spoiled habits he fostered before. He'll crack in a couple of days." However, on the evening of the 4th day, when Elaine pushed open the apartment door, she was greeted only by pitch darkness and dead silence. "Harrison," she called out, flipping on the entrance light as she did. There was no warm figure rushing to greet her as usual, nor any aroma of food wafting from the kitchen. She changed her shoes and walked into the living room, acutely sensing that something was off. My slippers, which normally sat by the entrance, were gone. She hurried towards the master bedroom and abruptly pushed open the walk-in closet door. All the men's suits and casual wear that had once hung neatly were gone, along with my watch, perfume, and even the razor and electric toothbrush in the bathroom, cleared out without a trace. The half of the space that originally belonged to me is now empty, glaringly so. This hollow emptiness, left by the abrupt removal of all traces of life, made Elaine's heart twitch violently for no reason at all. She panicked for the first time. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed my number directly. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. My voice came through the receiver, still carrying that calm and polite tone that drove her crazy. "Hello, who is this?" She even deleted my name tag. Elaine's voice involuntarily rose, carrying a hint of reproach. "Harrison. What do you mean by moving all your stuff out? What kind of tantrum are you throwing at me? Just because I went to the hospital that day. To make work easier, I rented an apartment near the company. No need to overthink it." My tone was calm and unruffled. "Make work easier? We're only half an hour's drive from your office. Why didn't you discuss moving out with me beforehand?" Elaine clenched her teeth, feeling an inexplicable warmth stinging her eyes. "I've already moved out, and whether we discussed it or not, the outcome would have been the same. I'm still in a meeting, so I have to hang up now." A hint of weariness crept into my voice, and before she could say another word, I ended the call. Elaine slumped weakly onto the sofa, staring at the home that had suddenly become so unbearably empty. For the first time, a sense of uncontrollable panic rose in her heart. She felt as though I was, truly drifting away from her life. Chapter 3. I was indeed very busy. After my awakening and rebirth, I devoted all my energy to my company's core project, a bid for a high-tech industrial park. In the past, I always left early to go shopping with Elaine or to clean up the messes caused by her male best friend, who was prone to getting into trouble. Now that I'm focused, my business acumen has impressed the company's top management. The routine daily greetings from Elaine, "Good morning, remember to eat," and "It's getting cold, dress warmly," which were once as regular as clockwork at morning, noon, and night, have completely disappeared. Elaine had lived like this for 5 years. Now, she was like an addict suddenly cut off from her supply, restless and tormented with an unbearable ache. She started texting me proactively. "It got colder today. Do you have a thick blanket at your new place?" Half a day later, I replied, "Yes. I made your favorite sweet and sour ribs tonight. Do you want to come back and eat?" An hour later, I replied, "No need to go to the trouble. I've already eaten at the company." Elaine even tried to visit me at my office, bringing my favorite coffee in hand. But when she reached the office door, she was politely stopped by the secretary. "Miss Elaine, I'm sorry, but Mr. Harrison is in a closed-door meeting with the core team and has specifically instructed that he is not to see anyone," the secretary said with a professional smile. Elaine stood in the hallway, coffee in hand, her face burning with embarrassment. In the past, when she came here, I would have made sure the entire company knew, personally pulling her into the president's office. Now, she couldn't even get a glimpse of me. She got back into the car, a mix of grievance and anger welling up inside her, and couldn't help but call her best friend to vent. I've already humbled myself so much to go see him, what more does he want from me? Isn't it just because I went to the hospital to take care of Ethan that one time? It's not like it hasn't happened before, why is he making such a big deal out of it this time? Elaine pounded the steering wheel in frustration. Her best friend on the other end of the line was silent for a long time, then sighed and said, "Elaine, have you ever considered that maybe it's not just about this one thing? He's probably just had enough disappointment." Had enough disappointment? Elaine froze. Every time you stood up Harrison for Ethan, you thought it was no big deal. But every single time, Harrison was there waiting for you. A person's patience has its limits. He might just be tired of waiting. Elaine's heart felt as if pricked by a needle, a dense, piercing ache spreading through her. She hung up the phone and sent me a long message, tinged with rare weakness. "Harrison, can we talk? Do you not love me anymore?" After a long while, I replied with a voice message. Elaine opened it with trembling hands, and my cool voice echoed through the car, "I've been holding you back all this time. From now on, you can be with whoever you want. I won't interfere." Listening to these words, she could no longer hold back her tears. I never said love or no love, but every word I spoke was pushing her away. Chapter 4. 2 months later, the industrial park project I was in charge of achieved great success. As a rising star in the industry, I attended the province's largest commercial charity gala. Dressed in a custom dark gray suit, I had shed all the meekness and subservience I once showed toward Elaine, exuding the mature, restrained charisma of a true elite. Standing beside me is Winnie, the heiress of Apex Venture Group, a key partner in the project. Winnie and I were deep in conversation about the project's future financing plans, hitting it off so well that to onlookers, we looked like a perfect couple. Elaine had to beg her father for a long time to get an invitation for tonight. Over the past 2 months, I had completely cut ties with her, and she could only learn about my current situation through financial news. When she saw me shining in the center of the crowd, her heart suddenly raced. But when she noticed me showing a gentle smile at Winnie, even thoughtfully blocking a glass that a waiter accidentally bumped into her way, a surge of jealousy and possessiveness instantly overwhelmed her. Elaine, in her high heels, strode forcefully between Winnie and me. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging in through the fabric of my suit, and forced out a stiff smile as she looked at Winnie. "Miss Winnie, right? Hello, I'm Harrison's fiancé." The air around us instantly fell silent, with many amused glances cast our way. Winnie raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing, simply looking at me. I furrowed my brow a little, a trace of displeasure flashing through my usually calm eyes. I didn't erupt in anger. Instead, I reached out with my other hand, firmly yet ruthlessly prying Elaine's fingers off one by one, pulling my arm free. "Miss Elaine, we've already broken up. Please show some self-respect," I said coldly in front of everyone, stepping back a full arm's length away from her. "Harrison. What are you talking about? When did we break up? I never agreed." Elaine's pride was shattered in that moment, her eyes turning red and her voice cracking with tears. "Don't be like this. Let's talk it out properly." I shot an apologetic glance at Winnie beside me, then gestured for Elaine to head toward the terrace outside the banquet hall. Once we reached the deserted terrace, Elaine couldn't hold it in any longer. She tugged at my sleeve and sobbed, "Harrison, I know I was wrong. Please don't be so cold to me, okay? Just look at me." I took a step back, looking at her as if she were a stranger. "Elaine, I've made myself very clear. I don't hold any grudges against you, but I just don't see the point in us draining each other anymore. Go back now. Don't make a scene here, it's not a good look. I'm not leaving. Not unless you come home with me." Elaine shouted stubbornly, then turned and ran out of the hotel. She thought I would rush out anxiously like I used to, worried that she might fall while running too fast in high heels. Elaine stood by the fountain outside the hotel, waiting for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. The steps were empty, and I never showed up. At that moment, Elaine crouched on the ground and finally burst into tears. She finally understood that the me who once cherished her more than life itself had truly let her go. Chapter 5. After the cocktail party, Elaine completely let go of her so-called pride and began to switch roles. She started chasing after me. Every day, I arrived at the company at 7:30 sharp, so Elaine would get up at 6:30, personally queue up to buy the private breakfast I used to love, and then wait for me in the company's underground garage. "Harrison, I bought you breakfast, it's still warm." Elaine handed it over with reddened eyes. "Thanks, but I've already eaten." "Don't bring it anymore." Without even reaching out to take it, I walked straight into the private elevator. When leaving work, Elaine's car is always parked at the company entrance. She rolls down the window and asks humbly, "Harrison, how about I drive you home? Let's go to that private kitchen restaurant, this time, I absolutely won't be late." I just politely shake my head, then get into the company's business car, or walk shoulder to shoulder with Winnie, who just came downstairs, to the cafe across the street to discuss work. Watching the natural and equal atmosphere between Winnie and me, Elaine stands frozen, her heart aching as if cut by a knife. Back then, he was always chasing after me. Now that the roles are reversed, I finally know how painful it is to be ignored and overlooked. Elaine sent this message to her best friend late at night, her words blurring the screen. Seeing that this trick wasn't working, Elaine tried playing the victim. One night, she deliberately stood downstairs outside my new apartment in a heavy rainstorm, soaking herself completely, and then sent me a message, "Harrison, I have a terrible stomach ache and can't find my medicine." An hour later, I opened the door. A flicker of hope rose in Elaine's eyes, but she saw me holding a box of medicine and an umbrella, walking expressionlessly toward her. I held the umbrella over her head and handed her the medicine. "I've already called an ambulance for you, it'll arrive in 5 minutes." "Elaine, degrading yourself to force someone to come back is very childish. Don't make me look down on you." There was no sympathy in my voice, only restrained politeness. Elaine let out a self-mocking laugh, tears mingling with the rain. Just at that moment, her phone rang wildly. It was Ethan calling. As soon as the call connected, Ethan's panicked voice came through, "Elaine. My studio has been accused of plagiarism by a peer, and now reporters are blocking my house. I'm so scared, please come help me." In the past, Elaine would have pushed me aside without hesitation and rushed over. But this time, Elaine looked at me in front of her, bit her lower lip hard, and said into the phone, "Ethan, you're an adult now. If you've made a mistake, hire a lawyer. Don't come to me anymore." With that, she hung up. She looked at me, a hint of almost pleading ingratiation in her eyes. "Harrison, look, I turned him down. I chose you. From now on, you're the only one in my heart, okay?" I looked back at her, my eyes utterly calm, and simply replied, "You don't have to choose. Whoever you pick has nothing to do with me." Chapter 6. Ethan keenly sensed Elaine's coldness. Ever since she hung up on him in the pouring rain and coldly refused him, he had sent over a dozen messages pouring out his grievances, all of which went unanswered. In the past, whenever he showed even the slightest sign of weakness, Elaine would immediately cancel all her plans and rush to be with him. But now, not only has she stopped funding him, but even when his studio was accused of plagiarism, a major scandal, she only coldly told him to find a lawyer. Without Elaine, his ever-compliant ATM and pillar of support, Ethan found himself utterly stuck in the circle. Debt and lawsuits drove him nearly mad. In his eyes, there was only one person to blame for all of this, Harrison. If it weren't for that bastard Harrison suddenly playing hard to get and moving out of the apartment, how could Elaine have become so cold toward me? Sitting in his dimly lit room, Ethan stared at the face of Harrison, handsome and dignified, on the financial news, his jealousy and hatred nearly consuming him. Since Harrison had ruined his peaceful life, he would completely destroy the industrial park project that Harrison valued most. He wanted to make Harrison suffer a total defeat and, through this, force Elaine to step in once again to clean up the mess and become dependent on him again. Soon, an external crisis erupted in full force. The core industrial park project that my company had just won and was aggressively advancing suddenly suffered a severe leak of commercial secrets. This caused a serious crisis of trust with the key partner, Apex Venture Group, forcing the project to be halted. I now faced the risk of being impeached by the board and bearing massive compensation costs. After the Commercial Crime Investigation Bureau got involved, various clues pointed to Ethan. He had taken advantage of the times he visited my apartment with Elaine to secretly copy the core data from my study. When Elaine learned the news, she was completely stunned. She rushed to my company, and in the office, I was calmly discussing with the legal team to handle the situation. "Harrison, is there some kind of misunderstanding here?" Out of the habit of 20 years of childhood friendship, Elaine blurted out the moment she pushed the door open, "Ethan might be a bit willful sometimes, but he doesn't understand business. How could he possibly do something like this? Is someone setting him up?" The moment those words left her mouth, the entire office fell into a deathly silence. My hand, flipping through the documents, paused slightly. I slowly raised my head, and those originally cool eyes completely turned cold at that moment, the last trace of warmth fading away entirely. "Do you still trust him more?" I looked at her, my voice as light as a breeze. Elaine met my utterly disappointed eyes and instantly fell silent, her hands and feet turning cold. "Miss Elaine, please leave." I didn't even bother to argue a single word with her. I didn't rely on anyone, let alone expect Elaine to place righteousness above family loyalty. Using the double-encrypted logs I had prepared in advance and the apartment surveillance footage, I locked down irrefutable evidence within just 48 hours. I then coordinated with the police to arrest Ethan, who was preparing to flee, right at the airport. The leak crisis was resolved, and the trust of Apex Venture Group was re-established. I pulled off a stunning comeback, not only avoiding losses but also using this opportunity to eliminate the mole within the company. It wasn't until the news with solid evidence was everywhere that Elaine finally woke up as if from a dream. She rushed to the police station and completely cut ties with Ethan. Then, looking dazed and lost, she held a bouquet of sunflowers, my former favorite, and waited outside my company. When she saw me walk out, Elaine approached with red-rimmed eyes. "Harrison, I'm sorry. I was so foolish. I took the wrong side again, and I broke your heart once more. Ethan is in jail now, and I've completely cut him off." I looked at her calmly, took the bouquet, and then casually tossed it into the nearby trash can. "I accept your apology. But there's no need to do this anymore. It's meaningless." My attitude showed no sign of warming up, it still carried that same polite, distant detachment. Elaine stared at the bouquet of sunflowers in the trash can, instantly soiled and crushed, her face turning pale. She tried to grab my sleeve, but I subtly shifted sideways and avoided her touch without a trace. "Harrison, please don't be like this. I know I was wrong before. I treated Ethan as a friend, but I never realized he was using me all along, and even trying to harm you. I see it all now, I can never have any contact with him again in this life. Give me another chance, let's start over, okay?" Her voice trembled, and large teardrops streamed down her cheeks. I glanced down at my watch and spoke in a businesslike tone, "Miss Elaine, if you're here today only to say these things, then I think our conversation can end here. The company still has a high-level meeting afterward, so I won't see you out." She looked at me in despair, but we were together for 5 years. I met her gaze, my eyes calm and unruffled as I said, 5 years is enough time to see many things clearly. Actually, the moment you said, "Is someone framing him?" I understood that this isn't a matter of who's right or wrong between us, it's that our paths diverge, and we can't walk together. I just got used to it back then. "Harrison, I really didn't mean it. I believe in you," she explained frantically, her face ashen and drained of color. I interrupted her gently but firmly, "That doesn't matter anymore. Elaine, your so-called clarity came far too late. I gave you countless chances to choose, but every time, you steadfastly sided with him. Now, I'm simply returning the freedom that belongs to you." I took a step back, putting a vast distance between us. From now on, we can be business partners, but privately, there will be no relationship between us anymore. I didn't wait for her feeble excuses anymore and turned back into the building. The automatic glass door slowly closed behind me, shutting Elaine's frail, trembling figure out into another world. The past between her and me, along with those wasted 5 years, came to a definitive end at this moment. This time, I never looked back again. Chapter 7. 6 months later. My company made a successful IPO, and I became the youngest business tycoon in the industry. Over the past 6 months, Elaine had undergone a dramatic transformation. She returned to her family's group and started from the very bottom as a project manager, becoming independent, mature, and responsible. At my company's IPO celebration banquet, Elaine attended in full regalia as a representative of the group. Midway through the banquet, Elaine, holding a glass of wine, approached me as I was mingling with guests. Once the others had drifted away, she looked at me, took a deep breath, and spoke. "Harrison, I've changed. Now I can stand shoulder to shoulder with you, no longer the burden who only caused you trouble. Can we start over?" In Elaine's eyes flickered the last trace of hope and sincerity. I looked at her, my gaze this time extremely formal and calm, with no trace of spite or vengeful satisfaction. "Elaine, it's impossible now." My voice was clearly audible against the soothing background music. "Why?" "I've already changed, so why is it still not working?" Elaine's fingers gripped the wine glass tightly, her knuckles turning white. I met her eyes calmly and said, "You're fine. You don't need to change for anyone. It's my problem. In the past, I wasn't clear-headed, I thought I had to date and get married because of my age. But now I've figured it out. My journey lies among the stars and the sea, romantic entanglements only hold me back from pursuing my career. I never planned to go down the path of marriage in the first place." Tears welled up in Elaine's eyes as she pressed on, unwilling to accept it. "Then what about me? After 5 years together, do you have no feelings left for me at all?" I was silent for a moment before giving the most decisive and dignified answer. "There is gratitude and guilt for what we once had, but love is no longer there. You shouldn't waste your time on me." At that moment, Elaine heard the sound of her own heart breaking. She took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and forced a mature smile. "I won't give up, Harrison. Since you were the one who pursued me before, now it's my turn to chase after you, until you fall in love with me again." After listening, I merely nodded politely, offering neither rebuttal nor encouragement. Turning around, I strode with firm steps toward the partners waiting for my address, toward the boundless possibilities of my new life. My upright back remained straight, and I never once looked back. Chapter 8. Another year had passed in the blink of an eye. My name now frequently appeared on the covers of major financial magazines. Throughout this year, I remained single, with collaborators constantly changing around me, but my worldly-wise heart had never stirred for anyone again. Occasionally, after reviewing the last document late into the night and carrying a cup of black coffee to the floor-to-ceiling window, I would also think of Elaine. But by then, the sentiment had evolved into a kind of sigh like that of an elder looking upon a younger generation. She had indeed grown up. Meanwhile, Elaine worked tirelessly over the past year, successfully securing the inheritance of the group and becoming a formidable female CEO in her own right. In the depths of her heart, there remained a corner forever reserved for the one who would never return. One autumn afternoon, a top-tier international business forum was held in City A. As I stepped off the stage as a guest speaker, I happened to see Elaine entering the venue, surrounded by a crowd. She wore a sharp black women's suit, her gaze determined and piercing, long stripped of the arrogance she once carried. Our eyes met across the room. Elaine paused and looked at me from afar. No longer storming over recklessly as she used to, she gracefully raised the documents in her hand through the crowd and offered me a gentle smile. I also paused, nodding to her politely but distantly, offering a courteous smile in return. Then, with mutual understanding, we averted our gazes, brushed past each other, and walked off in different directions. Some people appear in your life to teach you how to love others, some leave to teach you how to love yourself.